All right, let's dive into a story that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a movie, but it is a very, very real lesson in Australian workplace law. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with a suitcase full of ice.
Just try to picture this for a second. You've just had a baby, you go back to work, and you're told that the only place you can express milk is a storeroom. And there's nowhere to store it, so you have to bring a suitcase packed with ice. This actually happened to Tatiana Duarte, a waitress in Melbourne. It was, as you can imagine, incredibly humiliating, but it was just one piece of a much, much bigger puzzle.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? Or in this case, the $200,000 question. How does something like that spiral into such a massive payout? Well, it wasn't just about the bad facilities. It was about a whole pattern of behavior that the court ultimately found was illegal. And the answer is all wrapped up in a powerful but maybe not so well-known area of the law called general protections. So let's break down what that actually means.
Okay, so to really get what happened here, we need to understand the rules of the game. And general protections, you can think of them as a really fundamental safety net for every employee in Australia.
At its heart, the idea is really simple but incredibly powerful. You have certain rights when you're at work, and your boss absolutely cannot punish you or take what's called adverse action just because you decided to use one of those rights.
So what on earth is adverse action? It's just the official legal term for when an employer does something that hurts your job. It could be the most extreme thing like firing you, but it also covers things like demoting you, cutting back your hours, or changing your duties in a way that just makes things worse for you. It's basically the punishment part of the whole equation.
And what kind of rights are we talking about? Well, it's the stuff that comes up all the time in real life. You know, asking for parental leave, just like Ms. Duarte did, or asking to change your hours so you can take care of your kid. And a huge one is being protected from discrimination because of things like being pregnant or having family duties. These are the basic rights that are meant to make sure people are treated fairly.
So, with all that in our back pocket, let's jump back into Ms. Duarte's story and see exactly how this all played out. Because the court didn't just see these as one-off unfortunate events. No, it saw a clear pattern, what it called a calculated campaign.
Now, looking at this timeline, what's so striking is you can see how things just kept escalating. It starts the moment she tells them she's pregnant. First, her leave is refused. Then, another leave request, rejected. Then, she's pressured to come back to work early, and that's when the whole humiliating storeroom incident goes down. She asked for flexible work, denied. And then the final blow, she's fired. At every single step, she was just trying to exercise a basic workplace right, and every single time, she was shut down until she eventually lost her job.
In the court's conclusion, wow, it was blunt. They saw this not as just bad management, but as a deliberate strategy. The judge was convinced the company was trying to make her life so miserable that she would just give up and quit. And when that didn't work, they fired her and tried to cover it up by calling it a redundancy.
But, and this is a really important but, it's not as simple as, hey, I used to workplace right and then I got fired so I automatically win. To really get the full picture, we have to look at another case where a similar claim didn't work out. This is the absolute key. General protections are a shield to protect you, not a sword you can use to justify anything. They protect you from being punished for using your rights, but they do not protect you from the consequences if your own conduct or performance is the real issue.
So let's put these two cases side by side. It makes it so clear. On one side, you have Tatiana Duarte. The court decided the real reason she was fired was because she was pregnant and asked for leave. But on the other side, you have Axel Talagon. Now, she was also pregnant and had family duties, but her employer had a paper trail of issues with her communication and attendance that started before she was fired. The final straw involved a serious safety breach and an aggressive outburst. In her case, the court ruled that she was fired because of her conduct, not because she was pregnant.
And this quote from the second case really hits the nail on the head. The employer could prove they had a reasonable and proper foundation, a legitimate reason, for their actions that had nothing to do with her protected rights. So in the end, it all comes down to the why. What was the employer's true motivation? That's what the court is trying to figure out.
Okay, so now that we've seen both sides of the coin, let's get back to the big win. What did that justice for Ms. Duarte actually look like in the end? Look at that number. Over $200,000. That is a significant life-changing amount of money, and it was designed to do two things: compensate her for everything she lost and penalize the employer for what they did.
So where did all that money come from? Well, almost half of it was just straight-up penalties against the employer for breaking the law.
About a quarter of it was to cover her lost salary and superannuation. And get this, that 12% slice? That's $25,000 specifically for the hurt and humiliation she was put through. The law actually recognizes that the emotional toll is real and that it deserves to be compensated. And the court did not mince words. When a judge uses language like unacceptable and calls the humiliation obvious, they are sending a massive signal that this kind of behavior is just not on. It's a total rejection of that whole calculated campaign against her.
So let's boil this all down. What are the big things to take away from this? First, and most importantly, your workplace rights are real and they are protected by law. Second, your employer can't punish you just for using them. Third, the reason why your employer took action is everything. Was it really about your performance, or was it because you asked for leave? Fourth, remember your own behavior always matters. And finally, as we saw in both stories, having everything documented is absolutely critical for everyone involved.
And really, that brings us to the most important question of all, the one you should be asking yourself. We just looked at two really different stories with completely different endings, but both of them came down to the exact same set of rules. It all comes back to this. Do you actually know what your rights are at work? Because knowing them is the first and most powerful step you can take to make sure they're protected.